I was left alone in an ancient Victorian mansion in the sleepy town of Eldridge, where the winter nights shrouded everything in a spooky silence. The frost-covered windows were draped with lengthy shadows produced by the soft moonlight, which danced and created a canvas of ghostly figures that seemed to whisper stories of lost souls. The warmth of the fireplace did not chase away the chill in the air as I sank into the worn leather recliner by it. The logs crackled, like they were attempting to break free from the grasp of the approaching darkness with their fiery tongues lashing upward. The cold silence was broken by a howl from a distance that made the hairs on the back of my neck stand on edge. I wrote it down to the wind playing games, but there was something uneasy in the pit of my stomach. I couldn't get rid of the feeling that I was being watched because of the ghostly forms that the flickering candlelight portrayed on the walls. I groped for a faded photo album that was sitting on the dusty coffee table, trying to take my mind off things. The pages murmured tales of a laughing family that had once inhabited these walls. A ghostly family portrait gazed back at me, as if it were tracking every step I took. The tapping of a branch on the glass became a menacing tune as the wind picked up outside. I told myself it was just a figment of my imagination, but the room went dark as a sudden draft blew out the candles. I felt a chill go down my spine as I reached for my phone, which was the sole light in this dark hole. I caught a glimpse of an unfamiliar silhouette in the faint light coming from the broken mirror. Fear took hold of me, but I was driven forward by curiosity. As I tiptoed towards the source of my anxiety, the hallway felt longer and darker. The cold air murmured secrets, and my weight made the floorboards creak. When I turned to face the ghostly creatures outside the window, they seemed to materialize in the corners of my vision and then vanish. I felt a chill go down my spine as a faint, incomprehensible murmur reverberated through the hallways. It led to a door that was just ajar, one that I was positive I had closed earlier. The murmurs intensified in volume and clamor, pressing me to reveal the mysteries concealed within. I opened the door nervously to find a room that had been frozen in time. White linens covering dusty furniture stood like silent witnesses to bygone eras. A music box in the middle of the room played a spooky tune, its small notes cutting through the stillness. The place seemed to breathe as I walked in, letting go of long-held memories. Scenes of joy and sadness were acted out by dancing shadows, a sad, sweet lullaby that surrounded me like a ghostly embrace. My eyes filled with tears as I saw the past resurface in the present. But then something changed in the room, shattering the calm. The music box shrieked, its once melodic sound warped and disturbing as the temperature dropped. A name. The name inscribed on a long-forgotten gravestone in the backyard was uttered by a voice that was chilly and far away as the shadows twisted into strange forms. The space pulsed with a dark force that made me feel fearful. The apparitions turned hideous, their faces twisted with agony. Desperate to get away from the nightmare that had taken over the once familiar space, I staggered backward. I fled to the living room and locked myself inside, the wind outside howling in time with the haunting spirits. The fireplace, which had once provided warmth, appeared to be a weak defense against the approaching cold. An eerie wail filled the air, a chorus of voices demanding to be freed. I faced the lingering ghosts of a tragic past and a winter night that defied time in that eerie Victorian house. The line between the living and the dead became hazy, and the eerie echoes of a family's unspoken tale began to haunt me forever. Story 2. I was stuck in a lonely cabin in the middle of a small, snow-covered town where the world was silent due to the cold. The only noises in the nighttime were the creaking of old trees and the distant howls of the wind beneath a blanket of frigid stars. The blazing fireplace was warm, but not warm enough to take away the chill in my bones as I curled up next to it. The cabin moaned against the bitter cold outside, a remnant of a bygone era. I made an effort to get rid of the uneasy feeling that persisted in the air, but it persisted in a subtle way. My senses were tricked by the flickering light as it created swirling shadows on the timber walls that gave the impression of movement. The occasional wind murmur seemed like faraway whispers, and an old rocking chair in the corner appeared to sway on its own. I was stumbling through the pages of an old novel when there was a gentle tapping sound in the cabin. It appeared to be coming from the glass covered with frost and was rhythmic and purposeful, though I thought it was just the trees playing games. Every tap made me tremble. My trepidation gave way to curiosity, and I cautiously approached the window. The glass froze over, creating a bizarre dreamlike distortion of the outer world. A set of eyes met mine as I looked through, an ethereal glance that seemed to break through the freezing barrier. My name was spoken by a scarcely heard voice, carried by the wintry breeze. I staggered back, my heart racing, and wondering if being alone was really so sane. The tapping went on, louder now, and a pattern started to show up. A Morse code message. Shaking, I made out the terrifying words, "Let me in." The woman whose voice was heard outside was pleading desperately, breaking the silence of the night. I opened the door against my better judgment and was met with an unexplainable feeling of nothingness and swirling snow. Secrets whispered in the woods, but the wind muffled their whispers. I walked back to the fire and told myself that loneliness and exhaustion were just tricks of the mind, but the tapping continued as the night grew longer. The woman's voice became more and more frantic as she told a story of desire and loss that reverberated through the cabin's walls. Tormented by the ghostly figure, I discovered that the source of the tapping was a faded picture that was over the hearth. The woman's eyes in the painting conveyed the same helpless cries as the screaming outside. It seems like the cottage had the memory of a tragedy interred in the neighboring snow-covered cemetery. Driven by an unexplainable sense of empathy, I followed the phantom voice and the ethereal tapping into the darkness. In the soft moonlight, the cemetery remained motionless, with the tombstones acting as silent witnesses to the stories buried within. The tapping intensified as I drew near a forgotten grave. I knelt in the snow and lifted the tombstone monument to reveal the name of the woman who had haunted the winter night in the artwork. After the tapping stopped, a quiet thank you whisper drifted into the night. The ambiance within the cabin had changed by the time I got back. The intimidating presence had given way to a melancholy calmness. Now motionless, the rocking chair carried the weight of a ghostly spirit freed from unresolved pain. That winter night in that freezing tundra, I saw a spirit asking for comfort. The eerie whispers had subsided, giving way to the soft sounds of the wind and the hearth blazing. The cabin held a sense of closure, and the winter night embraced a fresh tranquility. The cottage had once been quiet witness to tragedy. Story 3. Beyond the known, in the sleepy little town of Ravenswood, tucked between old growth trees and disused paths, I came upon a horror. I initially sensed the menacing presence that would spend years haunting my dreams on a chilly autumn evening. I had recently moved into a centuries-old home that had weathered charm and creaking flooring. The residents of the village whispered to one another about the town's past, stories of missing families and unsolved mysteries. I had no idea this mansion had mysteries that would come to light as the sun sank. One night, I heard gentle, unclear words coming from my bedroom window while the moon projected an unsettling glow. I dismissed them as nothing more than dreams and went back to sleep. I had no idea that those murmurs would signal the start of an unexplainable haunting. The whispers became louder over the next few days, eventually becoming definite voices that seemed to come from within my house. I found comfort in the townspeople's companionship, yet their silence spoke more than words, and their eyes suggested secrets shared. As night fell, the ghosts appeared to become more and more present, feeding off my terror. There was a chill in the air, and shadows danced on the edges of my eyesight. I was so desperate that I looked up Ravenswood's past and discovered stories about a long-forgotten cemetery next to my house, where people who perished centuries ago from an unknown plague are buried, forced by some unseen power. I traveled into the heart of the forest one fateful night where the graveyard was buried. The moment I got closer to the tombstones covered in moss, the air became thick with an unusual silence. The only sound disturbing the ethereal mist on the ground was the rustle of leaves overhead. The whispers became agonized cries as I stood among the forgotten souls, telling stories of lives cut short and spirits restless. My heart raced, and I was led by an invisible force to a grave with a faded name that had been forgotten over time. I started a ceremony that has been passed down through the generations to bridge the gap between the living and the dead in a desperate bid to release the trapped spirits. I murmured the old incantations, and the forest reacted with an ethereal symphony of rustling leaves and faraway cries. The air crackled with energy. The floor underneath me began to quiver, and ghostly beings appeared out of the mist. Gratitude radiated from their translucent shapes, and their eyes carried the weight of ages. The agonized wails subsided and were replaced by a calm quiet that reverberated through the formerly tormented forest. A new peace descended upon Ravenswood as morning broke. The same whispers that used to haunt me were now whispering stories of thankfulness and atonement. The people in the town acknowledged the sacrifice made to release the spirits that were stuck between worlds with a knowing nod. Their shoulders lifted from the weight of the past. However, occasionally I hear the faint echoes of those murmurs during the silent hours of the night when the moon casts its silver glow. The voices of the deceased thanking God for the opportunity to be at peace. As the haunting changed, it became an eerily beautiful link between the physical and the supernatural, serving as a reminder that sometimes facing our worst fears can result in the most surprising kind of healing. Story 4. I became entangled in a story that made it difficult to distinguish between the living and the dead in the heart of New Orleans, where the air is thick with mystery and the Spanish moss hangs over the old oaks like veils. In 2015, I happened onto a Victorian property with a mysterious past that was both charming and in disrepair due to an employment opportunity. I got a spooky feeling the first time I entered the creaking door. It was like someone was watching me all the while. The realtor waved away my concerns, blaming the old house and the wet Louisiana weather. She had no idea that the house was hiding mysteries that would eventually entwine themselves with my story. The first few weeks passed without incident, with the same old routine of unloading boxes and getting used to my new existence. But as the sun sank below the horizon, the house was suddenly filled with a strange aura. Whispers in the dark of night, an inexplicably flickering lamp, and icy patches that lingered like ghostly fingerprints on the air were the first little disruptions. One night, I discovered a secret door in the attic, hidden under faded tapestries, drawn by some unseen power. The door creaked open, revealing a forgotten chamber filled with esoteric texts and symbols. The dim moonlight coming through a broken window danced with the dust, giving the walls a ghostly sheen. I was able to read the mysterious signs, and eventually came upon the name Alara, a mysterious woman lost in time. The whispers became louder, telling of a sad story of love and betrayal that was taking place inside the walls of the house I was now living in. Young artist Alara had become involved in a forbidden relationship that resulted in sorrow and heartache. Alara's ghostly apparition appeared night after night, her somber cries resonating down the hallways. Wearing an ethereal gown, her apparition prowled the house looking for comfort. The line between the living from the dead became hazy, and I was drawn into an eerie dance where the love tale was overshadowed by something unknown. Motivated by a combination of dread and compassion, I set out to solve the riddles that kept Alara on this planet. My friends, the local historians, and the municipal archives revealed a story of a forbidden love affair that had culminated in a deadly duel within my Victorian home. The more I learned about Alara's past, the more intense her spectral appearances became. Doors slammed shut with invisible force, paintings floated off the walls, and a palpable tension cracked the air. Alara seemed to be searching for a catharsis that had escaped her for many years. I held a seance in the attic, among flickering candles and the musty smell of ancient books, in a culminating moment of despair. A chilly breeze blew across the room as the incantations reverberated. Putting out the candles, Alara appeared in the shadows, a translucent figure drenched in an eerie light. I comforted her and understood her through whispers, knowing the pain that had consigned her to this life. Gradually, the air changed, and Alara's shape evaporated like mist in the morning. There was an unsettling quiet as the weight that had been on the home lifted. I was struck, in the aftermath, by the history that had been enacted inside those walls as dawn bathed the sky in shades of pink and gold. The whispering stopped, and the once haunted house was filled with a calm silence. While I navigated the unknown, I discovered a story of love and tragedy that surpassed time and mortality, and Alara had found peace. Story 5. Tucked away in the sleepy village of Havenbrook, amongst undisturbed forests and undulating hills, I came upon a terrifying story that eluded logic and tormented the very center of my being. It all started when I moved into a centuries-old farmhouse because I was pulled to its allure as a tranquil haven from the bustle of the big metropolis. The farmhouse had a nostalgic feel to it with its aged beams and creaking flooring, but as the sun began to drop and the shadows began to dance ominously on the walls, a queasy feeling crept in the pit of my stomach. The first few nights were broken by faraway murmurs that reverberated through the corridors, murmurs that seemed to bear down on long-forgotten memories. My uneasiness was explained when I discovered a secret chamber in the attic that had been forgotten by time. The room was furnished with dusty furniture covered in white sheets, and an ancient phonograph sat silently in a corner. A portrait on the wall appeared to be watching my every move as I explored, and the atmosphere became heavy with an eerie energy. The family in the portrait had lifeless eyes and faces stuck in an eerie scene. I felt a twinge of sadness when I recognized that these were the farmhouse's long-lost occupants, their tales lost to the passage of time. I interviewed old residents who remembered tragic stories involving the farmhouse and dug through the town's archives, determined to solve the mysteries that lingered like ghosts. A story of the Anderson family, who had previously resided in the farmhouse, began to emerge as I dug deeper into the layers of history. The father, Samuel Anderson, was well liked in the neighborhood and well known for his friendly demeanor and love of throwing exciting parties. But disaster came when an illness killed Samuel's wife and kids and spread throughout Havenbrook. Samuel holed himself up in the farmhouse during his darkest hours, his anguish resonating through the corridors. His grief was reflected in the whispers I had heard, echoing through the entire house. I started a quest that went beyond the world of the living because I was determined to bring comfort to the remaining ghosts. With an old picture of the Anderson family in my attic, I stood there late one starry night, drawn by some unseen power. As I spoke to the spirits and expressed my profound sympathy for their unimaginable agony, the atmosphere grew thicker. The temperature dropped and a chill crept up my spine as I talked. The place was pulsating with an ethereal energy. The attic was filled with a haunting tune as the phonograph crackled to life. The walls were covered with dancing shadows, and a sad voice sang words about redemption and sorrow. It felt as though Samuel Anderson's entire being reached out and used the music to close the distance between our realities. I sensed a presence at that very moment, an unseen hand resting on my shoulder, a whisper thanking me for recognizing the suffering that had bound the spirits to this world. The last note of the ghostly music faded, and the attic went silent. The air appeared to shimmer with a bittersweet force. Over the next few days, a peaceful atmosphere returned to the farmhouse. The murmurs stopped, and the ominous aura dissipated. Once bound by anguish, Samuel Anderson's spirit was freed, and the once haunted hallways echoed with a peaceful serenity. The farmhouse had changed from being a place of sadness to a sanctuary where the forgotten shadows had sought solace. Thankfulness overwhelmed me as I stood on the porch and looked out over Havenbrook's undulating hills. I felt very fortunate to have been a bridge between the living and the dead. Once a cause of terror, the haunting had transformed into a moving reminder that the past's echoes may be silenced with understanding and acceptance. I had discovered a narrative of sadness, atonement, and the enduring bond between the living and the spirits that remain in the realms beyond in the sleepy town of Havenbrook, where shadows murmured tales of bygone days. Story 6. My perception of terror was going to be completely altered when I became engaged in a supernatural mystery in the sleepy seaside village of Seaview, where the sea whispered old secrets and the salty air carried the stories of generations. The purchase of a charming beach cottage, with its worn exterior suggesting decades of stories carved into its walls, was the innocent starting point of it all. The people in my new neighborhood whispered to me about the dark past of the cottage, but I wrote it off as small-town lore. But with the sun setting and the waves' soothing lullaby resonating through the apartments, an eerie presence became apparent. A flickering light and a far-off whisper in the wind were the first indications, but they rapidly intensified into a symphony of unexplainable events. Whatever the season, there was a chill in the air. Shadows dancing along the walls, and doors slamming shut with an unseen power. As disturbing dreams began to infiltrate my nights, dreams full of faint whispers and a feeling of being watched, sleep became an elusive companion. Motivated by a disquieting inquisitiveness, I explored the town's historical records and discovered a troubling era in Seaview's history. The cottage had originally belonged to Captain Nathaniel Blackwood, an infamous person whose adventures at sea remain a mystery. It was legend that Blackwood, insane after a disastrous journey, sought solace in the very cottage that was now my house. I lost myself in the captain's tale, making it harder to distinguish between the real world and the paranormal. I heard the eerie strains of an old sea shanty being borne by the wind one stormy night, as lightning lit up the raging water. The song reverberated throughout the home, like though Blackwood's tormented spirit still lingered within its walls. The attic, which had been sealed since my arrival, drew me in, and the cottage seemed to come alive with ghostly energy. A blast of cold air welcomed me as I turned the creaky key, and the attic opened to a treasure trove of lost artifacts. A worn journal detailing Blackwood's spiral into madness, a captain's log, and torn maps. The journal described eldritch monsters seen in the unknown waters, and described a malicious force that had drawn Blackwood's crew into the depths of the abyss. Through descriptions of shadowy forms and eerie murmurs, it became clear that the captain had returned from the depths with something sinister, a malevolence that now aimed to close the gap between the realm of the living and the nautical underworld. Sickened by the memories of Blackwood's agony, I went to the old town historian for advice. His wise eyes betrayed a lifetime of unsaid wisdom. He described a ceremony, a marine incantation seamen employed to ward off evil spirits. I gathered the necessary ingredients, a piece of driftwood, sea salt, and a sea shanties that had once been Blackwood's eerie song, with trepidation. Standing on the beach in the moonlight, the sound of waves breaking in time with my movements, I invoked the age-old incantation. The water appeared to react as well, its waves taking on an ethereal brilliance as the air shimmered with an otherworldly force. It seemed as though the very elements worked together to drive out the evil that persisted in Blackwood's legacy. During the last refrain of the sea shanties, a ghostly figure appeared on the beach. It was a silhouette that spoke to Captain Nathaniel Blackwood's troubled soul. For an instant, time appeared to still as the air crackled with a tension that went beyond the material world. When the last strains of the sea shanties reverberated into the depths, the figure gradually faded away, leaving a silence that resembled the serenity following a storm. The evil that had for generations plagued the cottage and the community dissipated, and Seaview resumed its peaceful existence along the seaside. In the aftermath, the townspeople looked at me with a mix of understanding and thankfulness, having been released from the spectral shroud that had hovered over them. The once haunting cottage was transformed into a haven, with the sounds of a troubled soul finding relief vibrating through its walls. I couldn't get rid of the notion that, by facing the paranormal, I had taken on the role of a guardian of the town's lost legends as I strolled around Seaview in the warm light of dawn. Once a cause of fear, the haunting had evolved into a moving reminder of the thin line separating the familiar from the unknown, a line that, if crossed, could send ripples down the drain. Story 7. Among the foggy valleys and deep forests that cradle lost legends in the heart of the Appalachian Mountains, I was drawn to an old, dilapidated cabin whose history was written into the very lumber that framed its walls. In 2018, my quest for seclusion brought me to this remote sanctuary, where the boundaries between the corporeal and the corporeal started to meld in ways I could never have imagined. The cottage, with its worn planks suggesting the passage of time, stood like a remnant of a bygone era, enveloped by towering pines. An eerie cold crept into the air as night fell, and the trees began to murmur stories of bygone times. Shadows also appeared to move independently of one another. I dismissed the quiet alarms, attributing the discomfort to the cabin's rustic appeal. The faintest of murmurs that played on the border of perception was the first sign of something strange. In the corners of the cabin, there were soft murmurs that sounded like the leftovers of long-forgotten conversations. I thought at first that they were just the thoughts of a restless mind, but as the days stretched into weeks, the whispers became more audible and developed into distinct voices that appeared to call out from the darkness. Motivated by an insatiable curiosity, I explored the folklore of the area, attempting to solve the riddles hidden inside the cabin's past. The stories about the Price family, the cabin's original occupants who disappeared without a trace in the late 1800s, quickly spread among the townspeople. It seems that the murmurs were the unspoken remnants of their stories. The cabin revealed more of its ghostly mysteries the deeper I dug. A secret attic storage room held a treasure trove of yellowed letters written by Abigail Price. Her words, laced with hopelessness and longing, described a sad love that was beyond time. Heartbroken and bound to the mortal world, Abigail was left behind when her fascinating and enigmatic lover Nathaniel vanished for unknown reasons. I kept returning to the attic as the night threw the cabin in a pitch-black haze because their Abigail's letters seemed to carry a ghostly presence. There was a gentle illumination coming from the secret container, illuminating the aged parchment in an unsettling way. The whispers became louder, and Abigail's voice rose above the thickening air, a cry that reverberated through the aged beams. Driven by an eerie feeling, I set out to find Nathaniel's destiny in an attempt to make peace with the ghosts that continued to haunt the cabin. Dusty manuscripts and local archives drew me more into the past shadows and revealed Nathaniel's mysterious disappearance during a storm that engulfed the mountains in a thick fog. Equipped with this fresh insight, I followed the murmurs that appeared to resound Nathaniel's name as I retraced his final known movements. Shrouded in ethereal fog, the woodland held secrets that trembled with dormant energy. The entire terrain seemed to recall a catastrophe that had occurred under its old growth. A spectral silhouette that evoked the grief of lost love materialized before me as I made my way through the mist-filled pathways. As Nathaniel's apparition revealed the facts of his death, a fall from a hazardous cliff concealed by the storm's fury, Abigail's voice blended with the rustling leaves. Nathaniel's soul seems to find comfort in revealing his fate during that eerie time. The phantom forms vanished into the shadows, leaving a moving silence in their wake, and the forest, which had previously witnessed tragedy, now held the echo of their love. Upon arriving back to the cabin, I experienced an unusual feeling of resolution, as though Nathaniel's tale had provided an outlet for the murmurs of the unheard. The air seemed to shimmer with a bittersweet tranquility, and the formerly troubled area now carried the weight of history with a peaceful dignity. I couldn't get rid of the impression that the cabin had turned into a receptacle for Abigail and Nathaniel's voices as I sat on the porch and looked out at the moonlit mountains, a haven where human touch had healed the rift between the living and the dead. I had taken on the role of keeper of a love story that time had all but obliterated in the heart of the Appalachians, where misty valleys held long-forgotten secrets. The story whispered through the years, telling us that the need for connection endures and just waits to be heard. Story 8. I came onto a ghostly mystery that would tear apart my reality in the sleepy town of Ravens Hollow, where the moon threw long shadows on cobblestone walkways and the wind murmured through gnarled branches. I moved into a centuries-old home because I was captivated to its fading grandeur and the prospect of starting a new chapter in my life. That was the innocent beginning of it all. I started to feel uneasy as I became used to the mansion, its Gothic architecture towering over the surroundings. The rooms seemed to throb with a subtle energy that defied the laws of life, and the air itself held a weight. Nights turned into a symphony of unexplained events, including ghostly figures who flashed past and disappeared again, whispers that danced on the border of awareness, and an eerie chill that permeated the air. I went to the town archives and some older residents for comfort, and they told me in whispers about the dark past of the mansion. The mansion appeared to be a tapestry with tragic and enigmatic strands. Its halls had originally been home to the Harrow family, whose patriarch, Victor Harrow, had experimented with esoteric practices that verged on the illegal. I entered the mansion's secret passageways and chambers out of an unquenchable curiosity. Amidst the intricate layout of the mansion, I came across an abandoned library filled with ancient books and worn grimoires. One specific notebook caught my eye among the worn books, a narrative written by Victor Harrow himself. Through the fragile pages of the journal, I discovered a story of obsession and taboo rituals. Victor Harrow believed that the curtain separating the living from the dead might be broken, so he set out to discover the mysteries of the afterlife. Driven by a desperation stemming from a personal loss, his experiments brought him to a location where reality and illusion blended together, a transient world populated by shadows. The mansion appeared to react more as I read Victor's writings in depth. The sounds that had been faint murmurs gradually developed into clear voices, telling of the suffering of spirits caught in a state of non-existence. Ghostly forms emerged from the shadows and roamed the corridors with a melancholy elegance. I entered the mansion's hidden vaults one fatal night, lured in by an unearthly force that took me to the ultimate level of Victor Harrow's underground experiments. As I descended more into the underground world, the energy in the air became more intense. In the heart of the catacombs, a chamber drenched in an ethereal brilliance awaited me. There were symbols all over the walls, and the air had an eerie resonance. Here, I faced the core of Victor Harrow's obsession, an otherworldly portal, a gap bridging the world of the living with the fleeting world of the shadows. Shadows became real shapes as I stood in front of the throbbing portal, and the whispers of souls longing to be freed filled the air. Faces scarred with grief appeared, their eyes demanding forgiveness. It was evident that Victor Harrow's research had not only broken through the boundaries of the paranormal, but had unintentionally turned into a guiding light for lost souls trying to get out of their spectral purgatory. I nervously chanted an incantation, a request for forgiveness and understanding. A strong energy rushed through the gateway, and shadows swirled about me, seemingly recognizing me. The distinction between the living and the dead dissolved in that fleeting instant, and I was made a channel for the salvation of people who had been forgotten for a very long time. The mansion trembled with a ghostly energy as the ritual took place. and the doorway flickered like a dying flame. The shadows that had formerly roamed the corridors vanished, their spectral shapes absorbing into the gateway's throbbing vitality. The mansion, once a haven for the paranormal, lay in peaceful rest as a deep calm descended upon the catacombs. The mansion changed during the next few days. It was no longer plagued by the ghosts of Victor Harrow's obsession. Instead, it developed into a shelter for the dead and a haven for the living. The air lost its weight of the paranormal, and the murmurs that had formerly borne tales of sadness gave way to a calm silence. A feeling of closure swept over me as I strolled down the now holy halls. Originally a place of eerie mystery, the mansion now served as a symbol of the close bond that exists between the living and the dead. In the center of Raven's Hollow, where the shadows had murmured stories of lost souls, I had crossed over into another reality, and, in doing so, had solved the eerie mystery that had kept the mansion in the transient grasp of the unknowable.